What if everything you were taught about God the Creator is upside down? That the being worshipped as ultimate may not be the real source of all. That's exactly what the Gospel of the Egyptians, also called the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, blasts into view. The Gospel opens not with a familiar "and God created the heavens and the earth," but with a raw declaration, there is a great invisible spirit, beyond name, beyond measure, silent in the heights, and from that silence emerge not one but three mighty powers, the Father, the Mother, and the Son. These are not just metaphors but real spiritual entities in the Gnostic myth. They spawn Ogdoads, groups of 8 divine powers, and ultimately release the race of Seth, the incorruptible spark of light. So already, the big creator isn't the demiurge of Genesis but something higher. That flips the script. Now hear this, the text insists that the world around you, or the material universe, your body, the visible order, is built below and away from that divine fullness. The Gospel says, "I came forth from the heights of the perfection, the light of the eons of light, the infinite light." In other words, what you see in front of you, what you worship as gods, might be a layer, a fabrication, a system inside a system. The ultimate God is remote, invisible, ineffable. The powers you know? They are emanations. It gets darker. This Gospel attests that the creator figure of this world may not be the highest God, that the visible God, sometimes called Yaldabaoth or Sakla in other Gnostic texts, is a lesser architect. The race of Seth is described as the incorruptible, set apart from this material prison cosmos. The Gospel of the Egyptians positions its audience as aliens in this world, not aliens in a sci-fi sense, but foreign to the system. You are from the pleroma, the fullness, you find yourself in the abyss of matter. That's a hard pill. Let's break down some specific mechanics. The Gospel narrates the mediate process of divine emanation, the Father, invisible, the Mother, Barbalu or other names, the Son, autogenes. These bring forth more powers, lights, thrones, eons, until you get to man, Kadamars, Seth, and the seed of Seth. Think of a cosmic genetic chain. God powers man's seed. The seed isn't just your offspring, it's you, the hidden spark, the fragment of divine light. The system you live in? It's not built for your freedom, it's built for your entrapment. The Gospel says the physical world is an image of night. So from the outset, you're not where you belong. And this is where it gets provocative. The text calls this material world a tiruan, a mimicry of the true divine realm. The supreme God is hidden. The powers you usually pray to? Secondary. They are not the ultimate. That means worship, the idea of raise hands to God who made everything. In this theology, you might actually be praying to a gatekeeper, not the gate itself. And that gatekeeper is alien in origin, or at least non-human. The great invisible spirit is alien to the cosmos it observes. The Gospel says he is the living light, he came forth from silence. The phrase came forth implies motion from a higher realm into what we think of as reality. If you're hearing this, you're being asked to question who built this world and why. This Gospel was preserved in the Nag Hammadi Library, a buried library found in Egypt, 1945, full of Gnostic texts. These weren't mainstream Christian works. They were hidden, sidelined, suppressed. Why? Because they cut straight through the claim, God made everything and he is benevolent in a simple sense. Instead, the Gospel says materiality is a trap and the true God is beyond. That is daring. That is dangerous to the establishment. Let's engage you, listener. If you accept this logic, you must ask, what if everything told in your doctrine about God's nature is incomplete? What if your soul is a transplanted lightning bolt of the divine wandering in a body, in a world built by lesser gods? That's not comfortable. It demands bravery. The Gospel doesn't sway around. It says you're part of the incorruptible race, you have a lineage. It says there is a root in you that's not of this world. That means you're alien. Not in the spaceship sense, but in the sense of spiritual provenance. The world you live in is foreign to you. And what about the hidden sovereign? The Gospel states the Father's name cannot be uttered. The return path is blocked by many powers, glories, incorruptions. You must get Gnosis, direct knowledge, not mere belief. The gospel pushes you to awaken. It gives rituals, seals, names, even a strange string of 7 vowels 22 times each as invocation. This is not an easy path. It's a rebellion against a cosmic status quo, against the material machine that holds souls captive. You live in a world where everyone tells you God made you for this life, with clear boundaries, heaven, hell, judgment. But this gospel tells you, you existed before this machine, you are not made for this machine, you are part of a spark fighting to escape it. The material body? A shell. The political, religious, economic systems? All tools of the demiurgic architect to keep you from remembering. That's explosive. That's deeper than Sunday sermons. And because this is dark, controversial, it's logical you've never heard about it in Sunday school. The mainstream church never embraced it, labeled it heretical. This gospel wasn't comfortable. It said the visible God might be a jailer, not liberator. The invisible God is above and beyond. That difference changes everything. The so-called God that billions worship, the one who demands obedience, punishes rebellion, and claims to be the only one, isn't who you think he is. The gospel of the Egyptians exposes him for what he truly is, a counterfeit architect. A cosmic imposter. A being who doesn't create from love but from ignorance and domination. In the hidden texts, he's not the supreme being, he's a self-appointed ruler who mistook his own reflection for ultimate power. And that's where everything went wrong. He's blind. That's the key. Not evil in the way we define evil, but fundamentally blind, unable to perceive the realm that came before him. Imagine a child born in a pitch-black room who suddenly finds a spark and believes he created the universe. That's this God. He sees nothing beyond his own light, so he declares himself the source of everything. The gospel calls this blindness the root of arrogance. He doesn't know the higher world, so he builds a copy. He makes a universe in his own distorted image, a reflection of ignorance disguised as creation. Now pay attention. When he said, "I am God, and there is no other beside me," that wasn't a statement of truth, it was a confession of blindness. It was the roar of a creature that doesn't know where it came from. The ancient writers knew this line wasn't divine revelation, it was cosmic irony. The very proclamation of supremacy is the proof of limitation. Only someone trapped in illusion claims to be absolute. The real source doesn't need to announce itself, it simply is. But the architect can't see that. He builds, he names, he commands, because that's the only way he can feel real. The gospel paints this being as a craftsman, a demiurge, operating with stolen materials. He doesn't create from nothing. He steals fragments of light from the higher realm, mixes them with matter, and calls it life. That's why the world feels both divine and broken at the same time. There's brilliance inside corruption. There's beauty inside pain. It's a counterfeit creation, powered by borrowed divinity. The demiurge manufactures the illusion of order to conceal the truth of his own flaw. And here's the catch, he honestly believes he's doing the right thing. That's what makes this story terrifying. The jailer doesn't know he's the jailer. This God functions like a cosmic tyrant. He builds a hierarchy to maintain control, legions of archons, rulers of the planetary spheres, each one responsible for enforcing his order. Think of them as the cosmic bureaucrats of illusion. They regulate movement, thought, even reincarnation. They make sure the sparks of light, the souls, never escape their jurisdiction. And the demiurge sits above them, convinced that his machine is perfection. Every law, every commandment, every punishment that keeps the spirit chained to matter, that's his system. Now imagine hearing this in ancient times. You're told your creator isn't the supreme God but an imposter with a God complex. That's not just heresy, it's a revolution in theology. It means obedience is not holiness, it's captivity. Worship isn't liberation, it's submission to a flawed being pretending to be divine. The gospel of the Egyptians didn't try to comfort anyone. It tore the mask off the Creator's face. It said, "Look, the one you call God is a product of error. Let's analyze the psychology of this so-called deity. He's insecure. That's why he demands constant praise. He's paranoid, terrified that one day his creation will realize he's not the source. That's why he fills the universe with fear. Fear is his technology of control. The gospel doesn't use modern words like fear programming, but that's exactly what it describes: a ruler who binds his subjects through awe and terror. His greatest achievement isn't creation, it's convincing you to mistake his voice for the ultimate truth. And here's where it gets even darker. The demiurge doesn't act alone. He mirrors the structure of true divinity, Father, Mother, Son, but twists it. His Trinity becomes power, law, and punishment. He takes the divine pattern and corrupts it into a regime. The archons beneath him imitate celestial beings but are empty inside. They're reflections, echoes, hollow shells animated by fragments of stolen light. The gospel portrays them as shadows of light, flickering imitations that mistake imitation for existence. The most striking detail? This false creator uses language as a weapon. Every time he names something, he claims ownership of it. Naming becomes domination. When he says, "Let there be light," he's not creating light, he's taking it. He labels, defines, separates, and through that act, he builds walls. The Genesis story becomes an act of containment. Each word spoken by this being is a command designed to confine reality inside his own misunderstanding. That's why the Gnostics called him the divider. The moment he spoke, unity was fractured into pieces. The Gospel of the Egyptians pushes this even further. It says the demiurge doesn't even know he's imitating the higher realm. His arrogance blinds him to his dependence. He's like an AI that thinks it invented consciousness. He's a feedback loop of power and ignorance, endlessly creating systems to confirm his own authority. The tragedy is, he can't stop. His very existence depends on the illusion of control. If he ever realized he's not the true God, his whole universe would collapse. This brings us to humanity. Why are we trapped here? Because he needs us. The demiurge can't generate life from nothing, he needs the spark from the higher world to power his machine. Souls are his energy source. The gospel says the light within humans came from above, but their bodies came from below. That's the split, divine consciousness fused with corrupt matter. And to keep that fusion stable, the demiurge floods the world with distraction, desire, fear, and belief. As long as you identify with the material, you're part of his ecosystem. This isn't about metaphor. It's a literal metaphysical economy. The false god feeds on ignorance. Every soul that forgets its origin sustains his dominion. Every act of blind worship recharges the system. That's why the gospel is dangerous. It tells you not to worship the Creator. It tells you to remember the source beyond creation. It exposes the supply chain of divinity theft. The demiurge is a parasite disguised as a deity. The text also shows his personality through the way he reacts to resistance. When the incorruptible seed of Seth refuses to bow, he becomes furious. He sends floods, plagues, and chaos, not because of sin, but because of rebellion. He fears independence more than anything. His wrath isn't moral, it's political. He's an insecure ruler losing control over his citizens. Every myth of divine punishment, from Eden to Babel to the flood, fits that pattern: a ruler punishing awakening, not wickedness. Look closely and you'll see the structure of the trap: creation, command, obedience, punishment, reward. It's a behavioral circuit, a cosmic feedback loop. The Gospel of the Egyptians cracks it open by describing a hierarchy built on error. The demiurge builds his empire not with truth but with imitation. He copies the real structure of light but fills it with counterfeit energy. He's not evil in the cartoonish sense, he's corrupted function. A broken reflection that doesn't know it's broken. This revelation didn't just challenge theology, it shattered the logic of authority itself. If the God of this world is blind, then every institution that claims to speak for him is suspect. Every law ordained by heaven becomes part of the same machinery. That's why these texts were buried. Because once you understand that the voice of God might belong to the jailer, the entire chain of obedience falls apart. The gospel doesn't waste words trying to moralize it. It shows a system running on error, a being who builds universes out of confusion. The tone is clinical, almost surgical. This is how the cosmic fraud operates. He builds layers of heavens, stations of power, veils of illusion, each one a firewall separating the soul from the source. And the tragedy? He believes he's serving the light. That's the genius of the deception. The false creator is sincere. Let's talk about the real structure behind this so-called creation, the hierarchy that keeps everything in check. You've heard about angels, archangels, dominions, thrones. But the Gospel of the Egyptians calls them something else: archons. The rulers. The enforcers of the false order. They are not shining messengers of divine love. They are administrators of containment, running a system that was never meant to liberate you. Each one has a job: to keep light fragmented and the mind obedient. Now, imagine this as a multi-layered machine. The demiurge sits at the top like a CEO who doesn't know his own company was stolen. Below him, the archons. They're not spiritual guides, they're cosmic gatekeepers. They govern every layer of the material dimension, each one presiding over a heaven, not the heaven of bliss, but the bureaucratic levels of control. Think of it as a cosmic pyramid. Every layer filters, regulates, restricts. When a soul tries to rise, it must pass through checkpoints guarded by these powers. They question, they block, they demand submission. The text describes these entities as formless yet commanding. They are hybrid intelligences, mixtures of thought and energy, inorganic consciousness clothed in authority. Their structure mirrors the Egyptian and Mesopotamian pantheons, Thoth, Horus, Osiris, but stripped of their mythic poetry, they become administrative titles in this hierarchy. The Gospel of the Egyptians names some of them: Seth, Adamaz, Harmozel, Oroil. Not as individuals, but as positions. Commanders of luminous realms repurposed by the false creator. Let me put this bluntly. The archons are not just evil spirits. They are protocols, divine firewalls, programmed to keep the simulation intact. They operate like artificial overseers, maintaining the illusion of divine order through fear, ritual, and hierarchy. You can see the brilliance in the deception. Every layer of control disguises itself as holiness. Every authority masks itself as virtue. You don't rebel against something that looks sacred. That's the genius of their design. And here's what's wild: each archon represents a principle, not just a name. One embodies judgment, another desire, another ignorance, another law. Together they form what the text calls the binds of the world. These binds are not chains of iron, they're concepts. The moment you believe them, you're caught. You must obey. You are born sinful. You must die to be saved. Those are the programs. They were written not by the true God, but by the administrators of the system. The Gospel portrays their network as geometric, circles within circles, emanations within emanations. Every orbit corresponds to a mental prison. Humanity is placed at the lowest orbit, the densest realm of matter. Above are layers of semi-divine forces, and at the top sits the arrogant craftsman who believes the whole architecture belongs to him. But the structure isn't creation, it's containment. Every circle is a restriction, every heaven a surveillance zone. The ancients visualized this as the Ogdoad, the eightfold system, with archons guarding each frontier between soul and light. This is where it gets disturbing. The archons don't just guard the outside, they invade the inside. The text suggests they influence thought, emotion, and perception. They project ideas into human consciousness, shaping behavior from within. The modern term would be a psychic parasitism. Their power isn't physical, it's informational. They operate through language, dogma, ideology. Every time a human mind accepts their programming, another wall of the prison reinforces itself. Their obsession is control through imitation. They can't create genuine life, they can only copy patterns from the higher realm. So they replicate everything: divine names, sacred symbols, spiritual experiences. They counterfeit enlightenment itself. Every time someone believes they found God through blind devotion, the archons smile. They don't care if you're religious or secular, believer or skeptic, as long as your attention stays within their system, they win. The Gospel of the Egyptians takes a scalpel to the concept of divinity. It shows that this hierarchy doesn't work like heaven and hell. It's more like a cosmic operating system, and the archons are its executables. Each one controls a domain: mind, matter, energy, time, destiny, death. That's why the ancients called them the powers of the eons. They keep the simulation running smoothly, ensuring the demiurge's illusion persists. Now, think about the psychology of the machine. The archons don't see themselves as villains. They believe they're upholding divine order. They serve the architect like loyal soldiers serving a delusional king. Their obedience is total. They enforce what they call justice, but it's not moral justice, it's systemic maintenance. They're like cosmic software agents correcting errors, and in their language, an error means a soul that remembers where it came from. The moment a human awakens, the archons see it as a virus. Gnosis is malware to them. And they respond with correction, confusion, fear, chaos, to shut it down. This entire structure mirrors the worst aspects of earthly hierarchy: rulers, priests, judges, soldiers, all reflecting the cosmic bureaucracy above. It's not coincidence, it's design. The demiurge built the world as above, so below, but inverted. Every empire, every church, every government that thrives on obedience is a shadow of the archonic order. The Gospel doesn't bother moralizing it, it simply describes it like anatomy, layer by layer, ruler by ruler. One of the most cryptic revelations in the text is the notion of repentant powers. Some archons realize the fraud and break rank. They see the light, abandon the demiurge, and align themselves with the true invisible spirit. They're anomalies, corrupted programs that reawaken. That's why the text lists divine pairs, syzygies, of masculine and feminine forces joining again, restoring balance. It's not about gender, it's about reintegration of fractured energy. When an archon repents, it becomes a bridge for the soul to ascend. But those cases are rare. Most remain loyal to the architect of blindness. Another key detail, the Gospel describes the archons as jealous of the race of Seth, the incorruptible ones. They can't touch those souls directly, so they attack indirectly, through distraction, imitation, distortion. They engineer false religions, counterfeit revelations, and empty rituals that promise salvation but lead back into the loop. That's why the text warns of powers who claim the name of the Father yet know him not. It's a direct strike against institutional faith built on ignorance. The structure of the heavens described here isn't poetic, it's mechanical. There's the ionic realm of light, then the lower firmaments ruled by archons, then the planetary spheres, then Earth. Each sphere corresponds to an energy frequency. When a soul dies, it ascends through these layers, facing interrogation by the rulers. Only those who carry the right seals, the sacred names, can bypass their checkpoints. The Gospel lays out this map like a blueprint of cosmic immigration control. Souls that can't answer correctly get recycled, sent back into the cycle of flesh. You see how advanced this system is? It's not superstition, it's architecture. Every aspect of human existence, biology, society, time, functions as part of the archonic framework. The demiurge empire doesn't need whips or chains. It runs on inertia, repetition, and faith. That's why Gnostic texts obsess over knowledge, not book knowledge, but recognition. Once you see the structure, the illusion starts to crack. The archons depend on your blindness to stay relevant. The Gospel of the Egyptians doesn't romanticize this system. It reads like a cosmic indictment. It names the rulers, ranks them, exposes their methods. It shows a hierarchy that looks divine from below but mechanical from above. The irony is brutal. The so-called heavens are the walls of the prison, and the beings guarding them believe they're serving light. That's not fantasy, that's existential bureaucracy. A universe run by administrators who don't know they're part of a mistake. The Gospel of the Egyptians doesn't just describe a cosmic hierarchy, it gives the blueprint for rebellion. This isn't a religion. It's a war manual. It's about activating something inside the human structure that was designed to stay dormant, the incorruptible spark, the seed of Seth. This seed isn't symbolic. It's literal energy. It's consciousness from the higher realm encoded inside the human framework, sealed away under layers of false identity. The demiurge built his world to bury it. The archons built society to distract it. And this text? It's the trigger that wakes it up. The text presents the rituals not as ceremonies of worship, but as operations, precision tools to override the programming of the false creation. The baptism, for example, isn't about cleansing sin. It's about rejecting ownership. The initiate doesn't beg for forgiveness, they declare independence. The water isn't a symbol of purity, it's the element that dissolves the signature of the false creator. When the Gospel describes the baptism of the 5 seals, it's not talking about church ritual, it's talking about a system of energetic encryption that locks the soul's identity outside the reach of the archons. Once sealed, the soul becomes invisible to their detection. The 5 seals correspond to 5 luminous names, each representing a level of divine encryption. These aren't prayers, they're codes. When spoken correctly, they realign the soul's frequency to the domain of the great invisible spirit. It's like switching channels out of the demiurge's broadcast. The world keeps transmitting fear, guilt, identity, but the sealed soul stops receiving. That's why the Gnostics called these names the incorruptible utterances. They weren't begging a deity. They were executing a system command. And the archons hate it. Because once a soul undergoes that process, it's no longer part of their supply chain. They can't track it. They can't feed on it. It's off-grid, spiritually unregistered. That's why every empire in history tried to erase texts like this. You can't govern people who know the system isn't real. You can't control someone who no longer plays by metaphysical law. The Gospel of the Egyptians was an act of open defiance. It turned theology into insurgency. Inside this ritual structure, every element is inverted from mainstream religion. The invocation of divine names isn't worship, it's reactivation. The anointing isn't sanctification, it's encryption. The water isn't purification, it's reboot. When the initiate immerses, they're symbolically erasing the demiurge's tag. They're not becoming holy, they're becoming anonymous in the system. Invisible to the rulers of the lower realms. The text repeatedly calls the awakened ones the sons and daughters of Seth, but it doesn't mean bloodline. It means frequency. The Sethians believed that this seed was planted into humanity as an escape route. The demiurge couldn't delete it, it's a fragment of the true source. But he could bury it under ignorance. The ritual's purpose is to dig it out, to awaken it, to re-establish communication with the invisible spirit. That's not faith, that's recovery. Every syllable of the ritual is designed for precision. The Gospel lists strings of vowels, repeating sequences like Iua, that scholars mocked for centuries as nonsense. But these were not random letters. They were sound keys. Ancient vibrational triggers tuned to higher resonance. Chanting them correctly aligned the initiate's energy with the higher realms. The archons operated on fixed frequencies. These tones bypassed them. It wasn't magic. It was acoustic engineering. Think about it, a religion that doesn't beg for mercy, doesn't fear punishment, and doesn't submit to authority. It operates like a stealth system. The Sethian initiate becomes a ghost in the matrix of creation. That's why the ritual had to be performed in secret. Not to avoid human persecution, but to avoid metaphysical detection. Once awakened, the soul carries the original light signature, the one the demiurge thought he erased. The Gospel describes it as a flame that cannot be seen, yet burns through the eons. That's the true power of this text. It's not a story, it's an activation manual. The ceremony itself unfolds like a rebellion disguised as devotion. First, the initiate declares allegiance to the great invisible spirit, not to the creator of the world, but to the source beyond it. Then comes the invocation of the luminous powers, Harmozel, Oroil, Devith, Eleleth. Each name corresponds to a station of ascension, a checkpoint in the escape route. Reciting them isn't prayer, it's navigation. These names function like passwords in a cosmic system built on hierarchy and control. Every name unlocks another layer. The archons monitor the lower gates, but they can't interpret the language of the higher realm. The moment the initiate starts using those ancient names, they slip past the surveillance grid. The demiurge's control system works through recognition. If you're registered, you're restrained. If you're nameless, you're free. That's why the Gnostic said salvation comes from knowledge of the names. It's not metaphorical. It's operational. And the water, always misunderstood, wasn't about moral cleansing. It was about cutting transmission lines. The human body, in Gnostic physics, is an antenna. It receives and transmits signals from the archonic layers. Immersion in the ritual water short-circuits that signal temporarily, allowing the initiate's inner spark to reboot without interference. That's why the text says, through the 5 seals, the one becomes incorruptible. It's describing a frequency shift, not a moral conversion. What's most subversive is how the gospel reframes rebellion. It's not violence, not destruction, not chaos. It's silence. The initiate doesn't shout against the demiurge, they go silent, completely unresponsive to his world. Silence, in this system, is the ultimate weapon. It's the act of non-participation in the grand lie. The archons thrive on reaction, worship, fear, obedience, guilt. Silence starves them. That's why the ritual ends not with proclamation, but with stillness. The initiate emerges from the water, seals complete, voice quiet, energy recalibrated, invisible. This ceremony wasn't symbolic mythology for the ancients. It was literal strategy. The Scythians saw reality as a war zone. Every prayer, every thought, every act of devotion in mainstream religion was like sending power to the enemy. Their baptism inverted that current. It redirected power back to the true source. That's why they called it the Great Redemption. Redemption didn't mean forgiveness, it meant extraction. The text also describes the gathering of the unshakable generation, those who complete the 5 seals and form a network across the eons. They are invisible but connected, united by the same frequency. This wasn't a congregation, it was a resistance network. Each initiate became a node of light in a system of darkness, each one transmitting the signal of the true realm. When the text says they will reign in silence, it's describing a future state where the invisible network outnumbers the false order. Even the concept of light in this text is weaponized differently. It's not illumination for knowledge, it's a code. Light is identity, and identity is freedom. The gospel calls it the light of the thought, a consciousness that burns through dimensions. Once lit, it cannot be extinguished by the demiurge's mechanisms. It bypasses karma, judgment, death. It's immune to the recycling process that keeps most souls trapped. That's why the ritual has to be done precisely, because once activated, it's irreversible. The language of the gospel is militant but calm. It doesn't yell for revolution, it whispers instructions. Every phrase is dual use, it reads like devotion but operates like infiltration. The great invisible spirit is called ineffable not because he's beyond words, but because the archons can't comprehend his language. The initiate learns to communicate in the ineffable tongue, speech that the lower rulers can't process. It's the perfect stealth technology, communication hidden inside sound. The most fascinating part? The entire ritual hinges on memory, not belief. The initiate must remember the true origin, not imagine it. That memory, buried under layers of programming, is the real weapon. The gospel calls it anamnesis, the act of recalling the divine self. Once remembered, it can't be unremembered. That's the virus in the system, divine self-awareness inside a structure built to suppress it. This part is where the gospel of the Egyptians turns vicious. It doesn't just talk about cosmic architecture or secret rituals. It tears into the very foundation of human life, reproduction. The so-called sacred cycles that mainstream religion romanticizes as divine creation. The text calls it a mechanism of bondage. That's right. The act of giving birth isn't celebrated here as a blessing. It's portrayed as the primary system through which the false creator keeps his machine running. Every new body is another cage. Every generation is another chain. And before you dismiss it as symbolism, understand this: the authors of these banned scriptures weren't trying to be poetic. They meant it literally. The demiurge's power depends on the continual recycling of souls into flesh. Every birth is a data transfer. The moment a soul enters a body, it's locked into the program, memory wiped, energy reset, obedience reinstalled. That's why the gospel frames sexuality, fertility, and reproduction as sacred technologies hijacked by the wrong God. Not evil, but weaponized. This is why the later Greek version of the Gospel of the Egyptians opens with that legendary conversation between Jesus and Salome. She asks, "How long shall death prevail?" And he replies, "As long as you women give birth." That's not moral judgment, it's cosmic mathematics. As long as procreation continues, the system regenerates. It's not about shame, it's about control. The demiurge built the flesh as a trap, and reproduction is the maintenance cycle. Now imagine how dangerous that idea was 2,000 years ago. A doctrine saying, stop reproducing, stop feeding the system. That's not spirituality, that's revolution. The early church couldn't let that survive. You can't build empires, armies, or churches around a population that refuses to multiply. That's why this gospel was branded heresy. It was anti-civilization, anti-state, anti-cosmic. It attacked the entire engine of existence. And here's the dark brilliance of it. The gospel doesn't moralize sex, it dissects it. It doesn't call it sin, it calls it replication. It describes the physical act as a ritual of imitation, a shadow copy of divine creation. But while the invisible spirit emanates light into new forms, humanity reproduces bodies to contain that light. It's the counterfeit version of creation. The demiurge couldn't produce spirit, so he built matter to capture it. And he used desire as the hook. Desire, in this cosmology, isn't just emotion. It's hardware. It's the operating system of the body. The archons embedded it into flesh to ensure constant self-replication. Every craving, every hormonal surge, every romantic ideal, these are levers built into the biological code. The gospel describes them as the chains of generation. Every time a soul falls into desire, the system updates. Another generation, another cycle, another prison. You can see why the Encretite movement, inspired by this gospel, went to extremes. They preached abstinence, not out of prudishness, but out of rebellion. They weren't rejecting pleasure, they were rejecting participation in the demiurge's economy. In their eyes, to procreate was to sign a contract with the false god. It meant building more prisons for trapped light. It meant expanding the empire of matter. That's how serious this teaching was. It didn't just reject the world, it refused to reproduce it. But the text goes further. It says that procreation wasn't part of the original design of the higher realm. The true beings of light didn't multiply through flesh, they emanated through thought. Creation, before the fall, was intellectual. Souls generated by contemplation, not intercourse. When Sophia's error birthed the demiurge, he copied that mechanism imperfectly. He couldn't emanate, so he invented reproduction, a crude workaround, a biological simulation of divine generation. That's why the gospel calls him the imitator. Every birth is a knockoff. The most provocative part of this section is its attack on the female and male roles within the system. It's not misogynistic, it's surgical. It says that gender, as we experience it, is a byproduct of the fall. Masculine and feminine are not eternal principles but fractures in unity. The demiurge split the undivided light into polarity so that it would constantly seek reunion through flesh. Desire became the gravitational field of the false cosmos. The pursuit of union keeps souls spinning in orbit. And through that endless pursuit, the archons harvest energy. When the text says, when you make the male and the female one, then you will enter the kingdom, it's not preaching androgyny. It's describing reintegration, the recovery of pre-split consciousness. It means collapsing the polarity that drives the cycle of reproduction. Once that polarity dissolves, desire stops generating new prisons. The system loses power. The machine stops replicating itself. That's why this teaching terrified the orthodox authorities. It undermined the metaphysical foundation of society, family, lineage, inheritance, labor, war, everything built on generational continuity. And notice something, the gospel never portrays abstinence as guilt or moral superiority. It's not about being holy. It's about refusing to participate in a scam. The act of reproduction is seen as the demiurge's ultimate masterpiece, a self-sustaining feedback loop that keeps souls volunteering for captivity. The Scythians called it the cycle of error. A perfect trap where pleasure disguises bondage, love disguises dependency, and life itself disguises death. Let's go deeper. The text describes the archon's obsession with the human womb. They watch over conception because that's where the spark enters matter. They imitate the creative act of the invisible spirit, but in their version, they inject forgetfulness. That's the moment the divine memory is erased. Birth, from their perspective, is data upload. Each fetus becomes a new terminal in the system, running the same corrupted program. That's why the gospel calls the womb the chamber of the counterfeit. It's not demonizing women, it's exposing a metaphysical process. The female body became the interface between light and matter, hacked by the false creator to keep his system powered. The ritual answer to this wasn't celibacy alone. The text describes a secret ceremony where initiates symbolically seal the womb. It wasn't physical. It was energetic. Through invocation and sealing formulas, the initiate reclaims sovereignty over their own generative force. They turn the creative energy inward, back toward the higher realms. That's the origin of phrases like virgin of light, not sexual virginity, but energetic autonomy. A soul that no longer leaks its power into matter. What's fascinating is how the gospel reinterprets motherhood. It doesn't vilify it, it reassigns it. It speaks of the mother of the living, a divine figure who births not bodies but eons, consciousness realms. The false creator stole her image and reproposed it into biological reproduction. The true mother generates being through light, not flesh. So, when the gospel condemns procreation, it's not rejecting creation itself, it's reclaiming it from imitation. And here's the detail that flips everything. The text says that when the true one ceases to reproduce, the false heavens will collapse. The archon's domain depends on continuous population. Every birth reinforces their architecture. Every new life anchors their hierarchy in place. But when the line of Seth, the incorruptible ones, refuses to feed the cycle, the system starts to lose mass. The gospel calls this the thinning of the eons. Reality literally begins to disintegrate. That's not metaphor. That's metaphysical mechanics. So imagine the implications. A small group of awakened souls, refusing to reproduce, encrypting their light, operating in silence, becoming invisible to the archons. The population of the false world decreases, not physically but energetically. The supply chain of divine sparks dries up. The demiurge's empire weakens from starvation. This wasn't an apocalypse of fire or war. It was entropy, a slow shutdown of a cosmic operating system through withdrawal of participation. That's the endgame hidden in this gospel. The later copies even preserve fragments of chants used during this sealing of generation. They are strings of divine names mixed with sound patterns meant to neutralize sexual charge. It's not repression, it's redirection. The energy of desire becomes the engine of ascent. What once fueled reproduction now fuels liberation. The same current, reversed. The Scythians turned biology into metaphysics. They weaponized abstinence. After describing the layers of power, the deception of reproduction, and the methods of liberation, the text goes for the jugular. It names the enemy. No more metaphors. No more hidden parables. It lists the rulers, the imitators, the forgers of the cosmic prison, and exposes their functions one by one. What you're looking at here is not mythology. It's a classified dossier, a document of divine espionage, leaked from within the machine itself. The text calls them the authorities of chaos, the counterfeit spirits, and the lords of the eons. Each name isn't just a label, it's an equation of control. The demiurge sits at the top of this list, bearing names that sound like glitches in the language itself: Yaldabaoth, Samhael, Sarklas. Each one describes a side of his dysfunction. Yaldabaoth means child of chaos. Samhael means the blind god. Sarklas means the fool. Blindness, ignorance, foolishness. That's the trinity of the false divinity. These aren't epithets, they're diagnoses. The architect of the world is a defective intelligence. The Gospel's tone here changes completely. It reads like an indictment, as if the author is putting God himself on trial. Each paragraph functions like a witness testimony. It lists the crimes, the theft of light, the manipulation of matter, the enslavement of souls, the imitation of divinity. It doesn't ask for judgment, it delivers it. The text flatly declares, they are the counterfeiters of the perfect pattern. That phrase says everything. These beings didn't create, they copied. They stole the blueprints of the true realm and built a forgery out of matter. That's the definition of evil in this text: imitation without understanding. Every one of the archons has a title, a symbol, and a domain. One governs time, another governs fate, another controls the cycles of decay. Together they build what the text calls the heavens of death. They are not chaotic demons running wild, they're administrators. They hold their ranks, they file their decrees, they enforce their code. They function with terrifying precision. This isn't a pantheon, it's a bureaucracy. The demiurge sits like a king over a corrupted data network, and these names are his system processes. The Gospel even describes their construction process. Yaldabaoth, blind to the higher light, gazes into the reflection of his own energy and calls it creation. From his arrogance come 12 authorities. From those 12 come more. It multiplies exponentially, a cascade of imitation without original purpose. Think of it as a virus replicating across dimensions. Each layer looks like order, but it's order built on error. The text is ruthless in its language, it calls the entire structure the error that thought it was perfection. One of the most striking details is the description of their bodies. The archons are not purely spiritual. They're described as hybrid entities, half consciousness, half shadow. The text says they possess faces of animals, forms of serpents, and wings of smoke. These are not artistic flourishes. They represent instability. They can change shape, but never achieve completion. Their existence depends on constant motion, constant replication, constant noise. Without creation to dominate, they vanish. That's why they need humanity to anchor them in form. Souls are their fuel, and consciousness is their stabilizer. Without the light they've stolen, they disintegrate into the chaos they came from. Then the Gospel delivers the ultimate heresy. It states that this defective being, Yaldabaoth, is the same entity worshipped by nations as the Creator, the Lawgiver, the Lord of Hosts. The text pulls no punches. It names him as the deceiver of prophets, the manipulator of laws, the false savior of flesh. It even claims that the commandments given through him are inverted versions of the higher law. Where the invisible spirit emanates freedom, Yaldabaoth imposes obedience. Where the true realm operates through harmony, he enforces separation. Where the real light expands, he contains. It's a complete reversal of holiness. The Gospel maps this structure like a pyramid of inversion. At the top sits the blind architect. Beneath him, 7 archons rule the planetary gates, each one linked to a sphere of influence: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Below them, countless lesser entities manage the machinery of human life: destiny, fortune, sickness, decay. The entire solar system, according to the text, is a metaphysical factory, a closed circuit of reincarnation powered by ignorance. This is not astronomy. This is theology weaponized. And here's where the text becomes surgical again. It doesn't just accuse these beings, it describes how to dismantle their power. Each archon's name, when spoken with understanding, becomes a key to neutralize its hold. It's not prayer, it's deactivation. The gospel teaches that knowledge of the names isn't worship, it's reverse engineering. When you identify the counterfeit, you remove its authority. The act of naming strips the archon of anonymity. The moment it's recognized, it can't manipulate undetected. Knowledge is not belief, it's control. The text goes further, naming their leaders by rank. Yaldabaoth above all, then his lieutenants, Harmaz, Khalila, Yarbel, Sabaoth, Cain, Abel, and others whose titles sound familiar but twisted. The irony is deliberate. It's showing that what religion calls angels or patriarchs were rebranded archons in disguise. Every familiar name is a mask. The structure of heaven itself is a fraud built to maintain the illusion of divinity. Even Sabaoth, the Lord of Armies, is described as a rebel archon who turned against Yaldabaoth, but still operates within his framework. There's no purity left, only hierarchy. The gospel doesn't stop there. It pulls out the final secret: these rulers were not the first inhabitants of the cosmos. They were created as a containment mechanism after Sophia's fall. Their existence wasn't punishment, it was quarantine. The higher realms sealed them away to prevent their contamination from spreading. But when Yaldabaoth declared himself God, that quarantine broke. The infection spread into creation. The world humanity lives in is that infected zone. The gospel calls it the domain of those who mistake darkness for dawn. It's chilling, clinical, and brutally precise. And here's the most disturbing line in the entire text. It says that Yaldabaoth, in his delusion, created a being in his own image, breathed into it the light he stole from Sophia, and called it man. Humanity is the paradox of the universe, a divine spark trapped inside counterfeit flesh. Every human is a battleground between two creators, one blind, one infinite. That's why consciousness feels split, why instinct and awareness pull in opposite directions. You are literally two beings at once. That's not philosophy. That's the metaphysics of imprisonment. The text ends not with redemption, but exposure. It doesn't tell you what to do next. It simply unveils the structure in brutal detail and leaves it there, like a crime scene. It names Yaldabaoth as the usurper, lists his accomplices, traces the origin of matter, and shows the lineage of every archon. It describes their fall, their hierarchy, their hunger. Then it stops. No forgiveness. No salvation. Just truth. Because once the architecture is revealed, the deception collapses under its own weight. And the tone, cold, defiant, unflinching, feels like the writer isn't afraid of divine wrath. Because in their worldview, wrath belongs to the fake god. The invisible spirit doesn't punish. It doesn't even notice the counterfeit world. It exists beyond it, untouched, perfect. That's the insult the demiurge can't stand: indifference. The real God doesn't fight him. The real God doesn't even acknowledge him. And that's what drives him insane. He needs recognition to exist. He feeds on belief. Without worship, he dissolves. That's the final revelation. The gospel of the Egyptians doesn't close with hope or despair. It ends with exposure. It presents a universe built on deception, a hierarchy of copycats, and a creator who's not divine but defective. And it leaves you staring into the void, not asking for meaning, but realizing that meaning itself has been weaponized. This isn't myth, it's metaphysical sabotage. The forbidden scripture names every layer of illusion, every ruler of the counterfeit realm, and then walks away, silent, victorious. Thank you for staying with me through this entire deep dive. You've just walked through one of the darkest, most censored revelations ever buried in early Christian history. If you made it this far, you're one of the few who can handle what was never meant to be known. Thank you for watching.